Layla wasn't trying to uncover a secret. She wasn't snooping or plotting or doing anything cinematic. She was sitting at her kitchen counter on a Tuesday morning, caller ID lit up with Dad, because she'd called earlier about some routine paperwork. Her mortgage renewal, some signatures he needed to co-sign, nothing emotional, nothing dramatic. The kind of family errand she'd always done because, despite everything, she believed in keeping the peace. He'd rushed off the phone, muting himself mid-sentence, dropping the line so fast she hadn't even said goodbye. Layla shrugged, pressing her thumb against the countertop, and set her phone down. Speaker still on. Then she heard it. Not a dial tone, not a hang-up click, but the rustle of fabric, a jacket brushing against the phone, and then muffled voices. Two voices. Familiar voices. Her parents' voices. It took her a second to understand. The line was still open, her breath caught, suspended in her throat like a trapped bird. She didn't move. Didn't even blink. Slowly. Carefully. She leaned toward the phone. Her father's voice came through first, irritated, strained. "She'll sign it if we act concerned. She always does. She's too damn soft." Her mother snorted. A casual, dismissive sound that made Layla's stomach twist. "She's a burden. Always has been." There are phrases that wound because they're sharp. And there are phrases that wound because they confirm every horrible suspicion you've tried not to believe about the people you love. Layla wasn't dramatic by nature. She wasn't impulsive or reckless. She reacted to stress by getting quieter, not louder. Which is why, when her whole body went rigid, hands flattening against the counter, she didn't speak, didn't gasp. She just listened. Her father again, more businesslike. "We'll tell her we're worried the payments are too much. She'll feel guilty. She'll hand it over if she thinks she's letting us down." "You want it in our name or just sell it?" her mother asked. "Sell it. Split it. We could use the cash." Layla's fingers curled, nails digging into the wood grain, grounding herself. Her house. The only thing she'd kept after the divorce. The place she rebuilt her life in. The one asset she owned free and clear. Her mother's next sentence slid in like a knife dipped in sugar. "She'll never fight back. That's the good thing about her." Layla felt her body go cold, then hot, then cold again. She had always known she disappointed them. She wasn't the golden child, the easy child, the mirror version of their ambition. But hearing it said aloud with such practiced cruelty was different. They weren't worried. They weren't trying to help. They were strategizing against her. She could have ended it with a scream. Confrontation. An explosion that would finally tell the truth. But instead, she reached over and slid her phone off the counter, silent as snowfall. She didn't hang up. She didn't interrupt. She listened until the conversation ended and the line disconnected. And in that stillness, heart pounding, throat burning, Layla made a decision, not to beg, not to fight for love that had never existed, but to plan. "I didn't scream. I didn't confront them. I did something far more dangerous in their eyes. I began to plan. Growing up, I learned early that love in our house came with conditions." Layla grew up in a small working-class house that always felt like it was on the brink of falling apart. The peeling paint on the front porch, the rocking kitchen table with one uneven leg, the hum of an old refrigerator that sometimes stopped mid-breath. These became the soundtrack of her childhood. Her parents, Harold and Marilyn, treated every repair, every grocery bill, every chore like an invoice she owed them back. Whenever Layla asked for new shoes, a school trip fee, even toothpaste, Harold's voice would echo through the house, part complaint, part warning. "We work ourselves to the bone for you. The least you could do is be grateful." The words weren't said with love. They were said with ownership. Love in their home meant debt. Affection meant earning. Security meant being useful. Marilyn had her own way of making the message clear. A sigh, a pointed look, a quiet mutter just loud enough to be heard. "If it weren't for you, we could have had a better life." Layla learned to shrink early. To apologize early. To carry guilt before she even understood it. But every Friday after school, a small rupture formed in that reality. Release valve. A different universe. Grandma Lorraine's house. Her parents dropped her off because they needed a break, though they said it like they were performing an exhausting charity. But the moment Layla stepped through the door of the small yellow bungalow, everything changed. The house smelled like cinnamon and clean laundry. There was always a soft lamp turned on, always a chair pulled out as if someone had been waiting for her specifically. Grandma Lorraine never hugged her too tight, never demanded she talk, never guilt her into gratitude. She simply made space. Fridays felt like exhaled. I in that place. Layla wasn't a burden. She was a child. Lorraine taught her small things. How to budget change from the grocery store, how to cook without wasting ingredients, how to fix minor repairs instead of replacing them. Practical lessons disguised as games. But the most important lesson was spoken, repeated, and stitched into Layla's memory. You're capable, Layla. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Lorraine never used the word love like a ledger. Never reminded Layla of what she cost. Never treated care as a negotiation. Unconditional love felt simple. Which is why it felt suspicious at first. Layla didn't know what to do with something that didn't have a price tag attached. Sometimes, when she returned home on Sunday evenings, she'd feel the shift the moment the car door closed. Her parents' voices sharper, their eyes calculating, the weekend's warmth stripped away by the usual rules of exchange. It took years before she understood the pattern. Her parents didn't resent her for who she was. They resented her for what they felt entitled to take. Harold and Marilyn gave, but only so they could collect. Lorraine gave because she believed Layla would someday give to herself. The contrast was brutal. Conditional love taught her to survive. Unconditional love taught her she deserved more than survival. She didn't know it then, but those weekends sitting at Lorraine's scarred kitchen table, balancing imaginary budgets and laughing over burnt cookies, weren't just childhood memories. They were blueprints, skills, belief, self-worth. Lessons for a future everyone but Lorraine assumed she'd never reach. Because one day, Layla wouldn't just tolerate their guilt. She wouldn't just bend to their rules, she would know exactly how to stand. Those Friday afternoons at Grandma's weren't just visits, they were training for the moment I'd need to save myself. When Grandma Lorraine passed, she left me more than a house, she left me a test I didn't know I was taking. Grief didn't hit Layla in a cinematic way. There were no dramatic collapses, no screams into pillows, no poetic rainstorm waiting outside the funeral home. It came quietly, tightening her chest when she saw Lorraine's handwriting, hollowing her stomach when she opened the pantry and smelled cinnamon again. She had known loss in small doses before. Dead pets, drifting friendships, but nothing that cut through the foundation of who raised her. Lorraine wasn't just a grandmother. She was the only adult who hadn't charged her for existing. The will reading felt surreal from the start. The lawyer spoke in calm, practiced tones, but every sentence reshaped the room. The $900,000 house, the yellow bungalow that smelled like safety, was left entirely to Layla. Harold and Marilyn received a modest cash inheritance, wrapped in the polite legal phrasing of a gesture of gratitude. Layla didn't look at her parents when the numbers were read, but she felt their reaction anyway. Shock, offense, entitlement igniting behind their eyes. They spent their inheritance fast. Too fast. Retail therapy, Marilyn called it. Investment in experiences, Harold said as he bought a new watch. 4 months later, they were broke. And suddenly they were at Layla's door. Just for a while, they said. While they got back on their feet. While they figured out next steps. Layla agreed because grief makes people soft, even people raised in hard houses. She told herself it was compassion. She told herself it was temporary. But a while became weeks, then months, then years. Her parents began referring to it as the family home. They moved their furniture in without asking. Big, clunky pieces that didn't fit the space but claimed territory anyway. Harold hung a framed photo of himself in the living room. Marilyn replaced the curtains with ones she liked more. They contributed nothing financially. Not rent, not utilities, not groceries. Marilyn would open the fridge, look inside and announce, "We're out again," as if she wasn't the one emptying it. Layla paid bills quietly, the way she always had when they floated the idea of a trip to Europe. They pitched it as family bonding. But by the time flights were booked, hotels reserved, and tours paid for, Layla was covering 80%. Harold promised to make it up later. A phrase that had never materialized into anything but disappointment. When they got back, sunburned and satisfied, they made themselves at home again. This time with an even larger appetite, Harold suggested she take out an equity loan on the house. "It's just money sitting there," he said. "You might as well put it to use." By use, of course, he meant their use. Layla didn't argue. She swallowed discomfort the way she always had, converting resentment into rationale. "They're grieving," she told herself. "They lost a mother. They're scared about money. Good people help family." She repeated these sentences like prayers, hoping repetition could turn excuses into truth. But grief didn't fade, it gave them cover. And entitlement didn't soften, it metastasized. They weren't grateful. They weren't rebuilding, they were feeding, and Layla, raised on obligation, kept her hands open even as they took more than she could afford emotionally, financially, or spiritually. Because deep down, she still believed generosity would prove something. Prove she wasn't cold, prove she wasn't selfish, prove she was worth loving. She didn't see the trap for what it was until much later. "I told myself generosity wasn't the same as being used. I was wrong. But they weren't finished. What came next turned my entire life inside out." Layla stayed frozen by the counter, phone face down, line still open, letting every word come through unfiltered. She had already heard enough to break her, but her parents, unaware of the live audience, continued. Her father's voice, confident, rehearsed. "She feels guilty so easily. Just push a little." Her mother, "Mention those doctor bills. That always gets her." A clink of glasses, casual pause, as if they were discussing the weather. Harold again. "Look, she's emotional. That's leverage. We remind her everything we've sacrificed, she'll hand over anything. She always has." A soft laugh followed Marilyn's. Not a happy laugh. A laugh that reeked of certainty. "She's a burden. Always has been. But at least this time she's useful." Another voice in the room, a third person Layla hadn't recognized at first, chimed in, amused. "So what's the plan? Just ask nicely." Harold scoffed. "No. We guilt first. Then urgency. By next year, the deed will have our names on it." They toasted, clink, clink, clink. Layla's knees buckled, and she slid down the cabinet, landing on the cold tile. The sound of a dripping faucet in the background punctuated every sentence like a slow torture. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, the air too thick, her body too heavy. Her parents continued, oblivious. "Don't make it sound like we want the house," Marilyn said. "Make it sound like we're protecting her. You know, it's too much responsibility for you. We worry about you living alone." Harold laughed, loud and ugly. "If she starts to resist, mention how we raised her with nothing. She hates feeling ungrateful." The third voice again. "And if that doesn't work, cry," Marilyn said. "I'll cry." It was mechanical, calculated, like they'd run this playbook before. Layla pressed her palm to the floor to steady herself, fingers trembling against the tile. Her face was wet before she even realized she was crying. Not sobbing, just leaking uncontrollably, like her body had sprung a hole. Have you ever had a moment where your entire past suddenly made sense? Drop a broken heart if you know this feeling. Because that's what hit Layla then. Not just the betrayal of the present, but the relitigation of a lifetime. Every "we did so much for you." Every "you owe us." Every guilt-soaked favor disguised as love. It wasn't affection. It had never been affection. It was leveraged, a system. Strategy. A currency. She thought of childhood punishments, withheld praise, emotional fines she paid for daring to need anything at all. She had called it strict love. Tough love. Old-school parenting. But now, hearing them plot her life as casually as rearranging furniture, she saw it clearly. They hadn't raised her lovingly. They had trained her obediently. Something shifted inside her. Not a snap, not a dramatic break. Something slower, deeper, less visible. Humiliation burned first. Hot, acidic, violent. Then came grief. Then fear. Then a kind of numbing clarity. She realized she could never go back to not knowing. The drip of the faucet kept time as she sat on the floor, knees drawn in, shaking with something too complex to name. The call ended eventually. Silence returned. Layla didn't scream, didn't throw anything, didn't storm across town and expose them. Instead, she got up, wiped her face, washed her hands, took a long, shaking breath, and something inside her, quiet, methodical, inherited from Lorraine, woke up. For 3 days. She moved like a shadow through her own life. Quiet, observant, calculating. Then she started making calls. I opened my laptop and typed one name: Vivian Hale, family property attorney. Layla spent the next 3 days technically out sick, though the truth was far more precise than illness. She wasn't curled up in bed or numbing herself with TV. She was at her dining table with a legal pad, a steaming mug of coffee, and a calm, lethal clarity she'd never felt before. She didn't cry now. She calculated. The first call was to Vivian Hale, recommended in a forum for women dealing with predatory family disputes. Vivian answered on the third ring, brisk and professional. Layla explained everything in a low, controlled voice. The house, her parents, their financial history, their manipulation, their plan to put the deed in their name. Vivian listened without interruption and then said the sentence that would detonate the last of Layla's guilt. You are under no legal obligation to give them anything. The words felt unreal. No obligation. No debt. No inherited contract. Vivian continued, sharper this time. If they're planning to coerce you, the safest option is to remove the asset from their reach entirely before they can act. Selling the house. The idea would have terrified her a week ago. Now it tasted like freedom. Within the hour, Vivian connected her with a discreet real estate contact, Ethan Shaw, an agent known for quiet, fast, off-market transactions involving high-value properties. Layla met him later that afternoon at a coffee shop where he slid paperwork across the table and said, simple as breathing, off-market sale, full confidentiality. I already have a buyer. $980,000. Nearly $1 million. No showings. No neighbors gossiping. No time for her parents to catch wind. Layla signed. Then the silent war began. She returned home and began working like a surgeon. No wasted motion. No sentimentality. She bought bins, labels, and industrial-strength trash bags. She made a system because systems kept emotions from slowing her down. Mine. Uncertain, her things went into neat boxes, catalogued and ready. Their things went into a growing stack. Furniture, artwork, clothes, knickknacks, all the objects they'd dragged in over the years to mark territory. The uncertain pile was the hardest. Photos, shared dishes, blankets, but she forced herself to sort mechanically. Attachment was a luxury she couldn't afford. The next step. A storage unit rented in her parents' names, not hers. 6 months prepaid, every receipt saved, every agreement time-stamped, and no one could accuse her of throwing their things away. No one could claim financial harm. Everything was documented, intentional, airtight. If you're going through something similar, remember, you don't owe anyone access to what you've earned. Comment boundaries if you agree. Once the physical space was handled, Layla moved to the digital battlefield. New bank accounts. New passwords. New phone number. New email. Automatic payments cancelled. Subscription cards updated. Forwarding address registered. She wasn't disappearing. She was untethering. Each task felt like cutting a thread. And with each thread severed, her world got lighter. Closing day came faster than she expected. Ethan called her that morning with a simple confirmation. Funds transferred, deed filed, sale complete, no fanfare. No drama. Just done. Her parents were on a flight to Europe, blissfully unaware, drinking cheap wine and planning a future in a house that had already changed ownership. Layla spent her final night alone in the empty house. She walked each room slowly, fingers brushing bare walls, floorboards that creaked with memory. In the backyard, she crouched by the wilted flowers her grandmother had planted years ago. She whispered, so softly she wasn't sure if it was for the plants, the ghost of Lorraine, or herself. I'm not the burden you thought I was. Morning came bright and unflinching. The movers loaded the last box onto the truck. Layla signed the final form, handed over the keys, and walked to her car. She didn't take one last look at the house. Not even a glance, because she wasn't losing something. She was leaving captivity. When the moving truck pulled away, they were somewhere over the Atlantic, drinking wine and planning a future in a house that no longer existed. They landed on a warm Thursday afternoon, pulling luggage covered in stickers from cities I'd never seen. They had no idea. They touched down expecting applause, a red carpet, a grateful daughter waiting at arrivals, juggling their bags like a loyal bellhop. They didn't even text the flight number, just sent a curt, "Take a half day. Be on time." As if my schedule, my existence, was an accessory to theirs. But at 2:14 p.m., my phone lit up with a different message. "Mrs. Dawson. They're here." I was 2 hours away, in a tiny rented room with a mattress on the floor and boxes stacked like miniature skyscrapers. My coffee was still warm. My hands didn't shake. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what would happen when they arrived. Only curious. I pictured it perfectly. My father rolling his suitcase toward the house with that stiff-legged impatience, my mother already rehearsing the dramatic sigh she'd give when she opened the fridge and didn't find the groceries I should have bought. But the house wasn't theirs anymore, and my key wasn't their key. My life wasn't their life. Mrs. Dawson's next message came 5 minutes later. "Your dad tried the door." Made a dull, empty click. He looked confused. A dull, empty click. How poetic. For years I thought I was the broken mechanism. Turns out the lock just needed changing. Wait for what happens next, it gets wild. 2 minutes later. "They're trying the windows now." He's saying you changed the locks to attack them. Your mom is crying but also yelling. I laugh because of course she was. She never cried without a witness. Then came the voicemail orchestra. The first voicemail was pure rage. My father barking about property and disrespect. The second was sugar-coated concern. "We're worried about you, sweetheart. You don't sound well." Translation: "We don't have access to BY voicemail 4. Entitlement rose like steam off a boiling pot. A burden did this. Really? Is that supposed to be funny?" I hadn't written that. A neighbor had said it, apparently amused that the people who once called me a financial burden were now barricaded from what they believed was owed to them. They switched tactics. They called my work that I was on break when the receptionist stepped outside, eyes wide. "Your parents are downstairs. They're demanding to see you." I walked to the lobby and found them standing there, travel-worn, furious, acting like they'd caught me doing something illegal by not being available to them. My mother opened her arms as if she expected a hug. I didn't move, and my boss, Mr. Alden, approached, standing slightly ahead of me like a gentle, immovable wall. "In case this isn't clear," he said calmly, "they won't be allowed back in. Not today. Not ever." My father scoffed, tried to push forward, and was stopped. Politely, firmly. His face flushed, not from embarrassment, but from the shock of losing a power he never expected to be challenged. When security stepped closer, he backed off, grinding his teeth. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed again. Not a voicemail this time. Just a cold, clipped sentence. "Tomorrow. 10 a.m. Cafe on Ashford. Come alone or we'll come back to your job." I stared at the message, noting the tactic. Not love, not apology, threat. I could hear the subtext as clearly as if they'd spoken it aloud. "Obey us or we'll make your life hell." But something in me had shifted. The fear that used to flood my veins had evaporated, replaced by something clean, sharp, and unshakably calm. I didn't tremble. I didn't cry. I didn't rehearse excuses. I typed one sentence back. "I'll be there." Not because I owed them anything, but because I wanted to look them in the eye and say out loud what I'd already built with my actions. This time I wouldn't show up as their daughter. I would show up as the woman who finally learned to protect herself. I arrived 15 minutes late. On purpose. Not because I wanted to be cruel or because I hoped to provoke them, but because I needed to feel in my body that I was not operating by their clock anymore. I walked slowly down Ashford Avenue, past the bakery that smelled like cinnamon, and past the open-air florist with buckets of yellow lilies. Every step was a reminder. I choose the pace now. The cafe patio was half full. Mothers with strollers, students with laptops, retirees reading newspapers. I chose it because it was public, because eyes had a way of disarming bullies, and because I needed safety in a situation where I expected manipulation, tears, and theatrics. My parents sat at a table near the back, facing the door like they were waiting to scold a child, not talk to a grown woman. They looked smaller than I remembered. Smaller and more afraid, but also angrier. Rage always filled the gaps where their insecurity leaked out, and my mother opened her arms again. That performative tenderness she wore like perfume. "You're late," my father said, like a judge delivering a sentence. "Yes," I said. "I know." No apology. No explanation. No performative humility. They blinked, as if their scripts had been interrupted. We ordered coffee. I paid for my own, not out of pettiness, but symbolism. They watched, offended by the independence. The tension became thick enough to spread on toast before a single word was exchanged. Finally, my father leaned forward. "Do you have any idea the position you put us in? We come home and our house is not your house," I said quietly. "It hasn't been your house for months." My mother clutched her cup like a lifeline. "You could have waited. You could have talked to us. We were going through so much." "You ghosted me," I said. "For 4 months. You only contacted me when you wanted invoices paid. You didn't go through so much. You used me." My father scoffed, but his eyes flickered with something close to panic. "You're exaggerating." I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, set it on the table, and pressed play. Their voices crackled through the tiny speaker. Voicemails stacked in chronological horror. Anger. Then guilt. Then entitlement. "You owe us. We deserve it. You exist because we paid for everything. Time to pay us back." Conversations they never imagined would leave the air now lived in a permanent digital archive. The cafe went quieter, not because people cared, but because human beings are biologically wired to eavesdrop on disaster. My parents stared like children caught stealing candy. Their shock lasted approximately 3 seconds before shifting into justification. "We were upset. You can't take those literally. You know how we talk when we're stressed." My mother began to cry. Not the messy human kind of crying, but the weaponized high-performance sobs she used to control rooms. "I just wanted you close. I just wanted family." "No," I said. "You wanted access to someone you didn't have to care for. You wanted a free accountant, a free caretaker, a free ATM." I took a slow breath. "I'm setting boundaries now. Clear ones." My father crossed his arms, ready to dismiss whatever came next. But something in my tone made him pause. "No more money," I said. "No more support. No more emotional labor. And no more guilt." He frowned. "You can't just abandon us." "You abandoned me first," I replied. My mother sniffled theatrically. "But where will we go?" It landed on the table like a stone. Heavy, manipulative, prehistoric. A plea disguised as vulnerability, masking the expectation that I would step back into role. I stared at her, feeling nothing. No panic, no responsibility. Only clarity. "That's something you'll have to figure out on your own." Her face collapsed. My father muttered something about lawyers, consequences, retaliation. I placed a small, printed document on the table. A summary of legal protections, evidence of their voicemails, and a letter from an attorney. "If you harass me or show up at my job again, I will pursue legal action. I don't want to, but I will." Their silence was louder than any threat. That I stood up. Not dramatically. Not triumphantly. Just done. I didn't hug them. I didn't say, "I love you." I didn't look back. That I walked out, leaving behind 2 people who could no longer use me to survive. If you've ever been accused of being ungrateful for protecting yourself, you'll feel this next part. The weeks that followed were impossibly quiet. No phone calls. No emails. Silence felt like a luxury suite I'd finally checked into. I moved into a small townhouse in Richmond. Nothing fancy, nothing curated for Instagram. Just sunlight, clean walls, and a bedroom that allowed sleep and therapy. Dr. Caroline Brooks gave names to things I'd long minimized. Financial abuse. Emotional manipulation. Parentification. I didn't realize how many wounds didn't bleed until someone pressed on them. One afternoon, while unpacking a box, I found my grandmother's letter again. One line stood out in a way it hadn't before. Never doubt your worth. People who make you feel small fear how big you could become. I cried, not because it hurt, but because it felt true. 6 months later, I started teaching a workshop on home buyer protection, helping people avoid the traps I'd spent years navigating. People showed up. People cared. People thanked me. That a year passed. On a mild spring morning, I sat barefoot in my small garden. Hands in soil, sun on my face, tomatoes stubbornly refusing to grow straight. I thought about my parents sometimes. Not with hate, not with longing, just closure. Peace, I realized, didn't come from fixing them. It came from choosing myself. ***, if you've ever had to walk away to protect your own well-being, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments below. Your words might help someone else find their courage. And if this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss more stories about breaking free and choosing yourself. Because you deserve a life that feels like it fits. Remember, you're not the burden. You're the one who finally put the weight down.